My name is Jacquelyn Gill, and I wrote Grief Almanac for an Apocalypse. My essay is a braided essay that weaves in together my experiences as a climate scientist who also happens to be a woman going through a difficult journey trying to and failing to get pregnant, while also trying to keep a pandemic garden going like so many other people. And so it's also about the grief of losing my mother, not being able to get pregnant, and watching a planet that is finally starting to show the signs of a climate and biodiversity crisis that many of us scientists had been warning about for a very long time. This was the first thing that I've ever really written for any kind of audience. I didn't even know that it was for an audience at first. And a lot of it was just me processing my feelings around infertility and also just trying to understand this weird sense of grief that would manifest itself in my garden, right? Like unable to pull weeds, unable suddenly to kill Japanese beetles, like all of these things where I was like, why can't I do this? And then just sort of feeling like I am such a bad mother. The universe is conspiring against me to prevent me from having children, and I can't even keep my garden alive. Like, what is wrong with me? I must just be like a walking black pit of death. People who've dealt with things like infertility have often talked to me that or about their experiences, and we have a lot of similarities. Like you'll see a duck with ducklings and just you just hate that duck in that moment. Like why? Like there are babies all around me. Why can't I do this basic biological thing that every person is supposed to be able to do? And you just find yourself feeling so many big feelings about what seem to be really small things. At a certain point, you just kind of get a little bit in your own head. And so for me, the piece just really started as a process of just dumping things onto paper. And I just felt like every sentence was so thick. It was just full of emotion and also full of all of the symbolism that I was drawing on that were, based on my own experiences professionally and at home, that where I just kept feeling like I saw these common threads all around me. And it was really a process of trying to disentangle and make sense of all of that. Usually I'm writing either academic pieces that are, for scientific journals that have a very specific jargon, or I'm writing popular pieces about science or op-eds that are calls to action or, that are really leveraging my advocacy as a scientific expert. And at the same time, though, I've always been sort of a frustrated English major. I have always been an avid reader. I have always thought or just known that one day I would write a book. And I'm married to a creative writer who teaches creative writing. And so I just sort of feel like this was an opportunity to tap into just a creative core that has always been there, but I just was sort of neglecting as I was developing these other kinds of skills. I often even joke that I became a scientist partly because I love the words so much. There's just amazing words. It's like, and as a language lover, being able to look at a word like esker, which is a glacial formation, like just the word esker is just really fun and interesting. And I feel like it just gives me a whole new toolkit to use as a writer. I really argued with my editor for The Sun about whether or not I could use the phrase heat dome, right? Like I talk about depression like a heat dome because, there had been a lot of heat domes in the news where people were just really suffering through these like oppressive heat waves. And to me, just like the idea of like this oppressive weight of hot weather, just that you can't escape, especially when it's in the wrong time of year, right? Like November, just felt like such a great metaphor for depression and grief. Like you're just like, it's a natural force and it's here and it's pressing down on me. And I feel like it's sapping my energy and I can't do anything. And I wanted to use that word. I wanted to use that phrase, heat dome. And I had a lot of back and forth with my editor about whether I would be allowed to keep that. And he finally let me keep it. But I felt like it was really important to me that the science could show up in unexpected and interesting ways that would both, show that there are these sort of big universal feelings and processes that are sort of threaded throughout the natural and the human world, But also, not that there's a dichotomy there, but we often think of it as a dichotomy. But also, like, because it's such a core part of my identity, it's how I process and how I think about things. And I think that there's so much scope for creativity and beauty within science. Like, I think about my mom, who wrote so many novels that just sat on discs that have been lost to time, and she died never, always having wanted to be a writer, but never ever taking the step of submitting something ever. She never once submitted whole manuscript, short stories, anything. She just sat on them, and she would have lost nothing, right, by putting those out into the world. And I just, to me, reaching 40 and realizing, I don't know how many decades of life I have left. But there are these things that I've always wanted to do. And it's really time for me to stop letting fear get in the way of that. And I would just say, you're going to be afraid. So just do it afraid. Just submit it afraid. They're not going to take away your birthday. Like, what's the worst that can happen?